two points I wanted to make here in the metaphysical corruption, I call it. When you are sort of created by supernatural power or God, and when your existence sort of manifested on the planet, on human society, where what you follow by the sacredity of text or the rituals and authenticated by that, who are human beings to change it? So you clubbed or clutched into an eternal slavery, what I call a cosmogenic corruption. That's the cosmogenic corruption that has happened. So yes, it is division of laborers and division of labors, but they are in the ghettoized enclosed class, which economy doesn't allow to flow to emancipate themselves. But nonetheless, one needs to be very careful. Dr. Ambedkar was quite critical of Marx by calling human as a mere product of economic creature, as an economic creature. He's not just an economic creature in that sense. And that's where he confront with the Gandhi on the basis of Varnashrama Dharma. I think it's in Constitution Assembly on November 1955-49. He said, I'm quoting him, I'm of opinion that in believing that we are a nation, we are cherishing a great delusion. How can a people divided into several thousands of castes be a nation? In India, there are castes. The castes are anti-national. In the first place, because they bring about a separation of social life. They are anti-national also because they generate jealousy and antipathy between caste and caste. But we must overcome all these difficulties if we wish to become a nation into a reality. Without fraternity, liberty, and equality, we will no deeper than there will be no deeper notions than the course of paint. So it will be only at the surface. That's why he goes to fraternity clubs with the Maitri. He says, I have to borrow a notion of Maitri from the dictionary of the Buddha, because democracy that I wanted to define does not manifest in the Western model. Because what's the difference? The difference is that has a bloodshed. And the revolution that the Buddha in front of Hunka Jati he launched manifested in the Western philosophical or political thought, including economical structure, and aesthetic is a special area that needs to be dealt carefully. In the Western frame of political thought, that's why Dr. Ambedkar arguments are uniquely depart from the West. That it does not shed a drop of blood. That's something one needs to important. It's not just that, but also democracy as an attitude of mind, he says. You cannot reform the world by unless reformation of mind. So his method goes to the notional change as he used it. So unless that doesn't happen, I think the previous paper what Nikita was trying to say, and even Atika's paper, which is a true social reality, well, dismantlation of icons or failure of intercaste marriages, I think that raises an important question. Two questions. First question is negation that Dr. Ambedkar did not fail. But have cultures and the power, or have we failed Dr. Ambedkar? Have we, in a capital W and we, I'm not saying constitution is failed, have we failed the constitution? We are approaching towards the probably 75th anniversary of making of constitution. And that is a 75 years of history. But I am quite skeptical to believe that, because slavery abandoned in the West in 1835-36, around that period. And women's vote right came after the women sort of achieved the voting right in India after independence. And the reservation policies for emancipation, look at where Ambedkarite or the scheduled caste or the marginalized people are holding a conference in Brandeis. There was a conference in Harvard. people like Super Queen and other people sort of reaching out to those communities to understand what is happening in the greater engaged Buddhism. There are students from Columbia and Stanford and so on and so forth. So it really showed the immense, numerous results, right? But when we look at the caste race theory, I think questions still pertinence, and I don't know about, I'm not expert in commenting on that, how I can sort of have indicators of the racial development in the Western world. That's something needs to understand. My third point is, while understanding difference between the discrimination or the artistic undermining that has been created by those communities, it is important to understand the difference between caste and race, because otherwise we'll get swallowed by these two words in the West and in India. Now, we are sitting here and, for example, even in Indian communities, race, caste is a different phenomena than the race. Race is something you can clearly visible: African, Chinese, American, white, black, Mongolian. That is race. I don't think who belongs to which caste here when I see Indian faces. I cannot recognize that. It's invisible life, that's what I'm saying. I do not know what caste they come from. So I can't say all whites are Brahmins and all blacks are Dalit. I cannot. So phenomena that what he was trying to emancipate economically, socially, politically, culturally, and even at the race or caste matters, in that sense, quite complicated than the black and white or the it's not easy. I'm saying I'm not unsympathetic with the Western struggle. What I'm trying to say, the complexity that the caste complexities and the cluster that Dr. Ambedkar was dealing was much, much deeper. Therefore, he was saying economic, constitutional, political, societal are not enough. It's not enough. It's something, caste is a notion of mind and reformation of mind, and then goes back to the Buddha by dismantling the karma theory, your origin theory. That's where the problem he was trying to correct. It remembers me, I don't know if you heard of a story of John Marshall in United States. He's an expert in nonviolence communication. He tells a very beautiful story. There is a monk sitting on the river, and throughout the river there is a dead bodies of kids were coming, and he was jumping and trying to save the kids from the river. And then he said, one after another, boys are sort of sinking in the water. And then he said, oh, wait a minute, what's happening? And then he saw there is some flow of kids were coming from some door. So he went and closed the door, and then babies were stopped coming into the water. So flowing babies or floating babies are the symptoms, and the consequences that the door was open for them to die. So we have to close that door. That's the metaphysical problem we have to correct in the very story of origin. And that's where Buddha comes in, or probably Navayana Buddhism comes in. So, well, in terms of, yes, relevancy, what I would call, you see the consequences, how Ambedkar is rising in the academic sphere in Western world. People are taking interest. We look at the story of the Roma gypsies in Hungary, and now Burakumin communities in Japan, and mostly caste matters, race matters. These both are sort of now entwining, but that's where responsibility of Ambedkarite Buddhist, which I recently spoke in Colombia, lies. It must not turn into another caste identity. And that's where he says, "Pan tumchi jawabdari mochi hai." Therefore, your responsibility is greater. One must not blame me that I have spoiled the Buddha Dhamma or blotted the Buddha Dhamma by giving you a Buddha Dhamma. And that's where that responsibility comes from, deeper conviction. So I think I will stop here. And while sort of, yes, commenting very quickly on paper, and then we'll open the floor.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Well, I already mentioned that sort of the on intercaste marriages, which is very rightly put by Nikita, a woman as an agency and caste as a social context, property, not just physical property, but women as a property, as a commodity, the notion that has been infiltrated in the society, and ultimately children means the futuristic generation that has been had gone through the moral injuries. That's what I'm calling it. The what Professor Halsey was calling is a moral anthropology needs to be corrected. And that's where problem of intercaste marriages comes. I'm still lingering on those questions on both is a common sort of would be better for Nikita and Atika. Uh, is it a mere grim picture or there is some hope? Right? You don't throw the stone to the dry tree. You throw stone to the where fruits are. Right? Of course they are dismantling, but they are dismantling because that matters. Well, can be there is another side of the story. It's not mere a grim picture. Secondly, in terms of when we say, I have a question about anything that we suffix with the word aesthetics. Christian aesthetics, Islamic aesthetics, Buddhist aesthetics, Dalit aesthetics. Aesthetics itself represent that it's not a transcendental space, but it's an intermediary space where we release our ego by seeing beauty or by seeing even suffering. What Kant's call is sublimity can be releasing, or what Aristotle was saying is a purgation. So when I see a tragedy on Hamlet's stage, lying the all dead bodies, and that gives me a question, my goodness, what kind of a question that comes to my life? Like we have seen some service picture exhibited. So if you that's shown to American white or black, I don't want to use these words by the way, but superior or
my interpretation could be wrong also, you can correct me in any way if I'm misrepresenting it, but like in the times of rising neo-Buddhism, right, like the Navana Buddhism, Ambedkar's intention to be Buddhism, where his followers will take like the Dalit community or like any other marginalized community or anyone, right, any follower of the right side. So are we making any distinction between the Buddhism, existing Buddhism, and then the neo-Buddhism, right? Like the Babasai Buddhism? Because I recently come across a couple of articles which also hails by the Sri Lankan Buddhism, which has a historical evidences. So I think we have to make a distinction because as far as Babasai is concerned, it is a way forward to be equality in a concept of religion. But then if we largely look, I don't think that like that's how I understand Baba Sahib. Like even if you question the whole system of religion, also that's the where Baba Sahib intended to us to lead, right? Like the larger question, and then dismantle the oppressive the people of oppressed at any place of the world. So are we making that distinction or not? That's what my question. And then because the majoritarian plays a large role, if you understand or not understand, but the world politics is today surrounding around the majoritarian politics, be it in India, be it in the US. If you see the Palestine-Israel, the conflict, even the place where it has a historical context, but so are we making that distinction or not? So that's what my question largely. It's kind of a clarification.
It's a question for Mahesh or?
Yeah, it's Mahesh. Anyone can answer it actually. Who's expert in that?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not an expert on religion or Buddhism, but with my limited knowledge, I mean, I would request Professor Santosh to respond to this question. But in my own experience, like I lived in Thailand, with the Buddhist monks, and I know there the women monks right?
Nuns. Nuns, yeah.
Women nuns, like they are still fighting for recognition, official recognition as well as the rights, right? So that kind of Buddhism is different, and the Buddhism that you are talking about in Sri Lanka is a different Buddhism, right? Where like even like in Myanmar, so wherever this majoritarian Buddhist societies where they try to impose restrictions and hegemony on women or the other communities. I mean, in my understanding, Baba Sahib, I think that's a unique feature of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, the way he reinterpreted Buddhism with his Navayana Buddhism, making it most accessible and most, most oriented to the marginalized. I think that distinction is very clear, but I leave it to Professor Santosh, who is Professor Queen, to comment on Ashok's question.
I think, as I said, Dr. Ambedkar not only revived Buddhism, he reinterpreted and reinvented Buddhism in a one time. And you see the pressure of conversion is huge on his mind. And that was the last phase of his life. I sort of spoke in New Jersey. There was a meeting of his close associate in 1955 when he thought of already, you see the references in Annihilation of Caste, even in Genesis to some extent. And 1956, he converted, took 20 years. He was not waiting that which religion I should wait. You can see a very strong hint. Even presenting a constitution to the first president of India, given an experience of democracy is not new to Indian civilization. It was very much existing in Buddha's Sangha. So he was dropping his hint. But while inventing Buddhist India, if I speak his Devsian language, he Bahujan Hitai, Bahujan Sukhai, ARI slogan, All India Radio slogan, putting Ashok Chakra on the Indian flag, replacing the Charkha, right? Making Ashokan lion as a national emblem. He gave that identity, not merely as Buddhist, but I don't know if you've gone through the flag bill, the debate that has happened between Nehru and parliamentary debates. So Nehru himself cites what the rest of the world learned from the Ashoka by citing that he was the greatest king, had a policy of tolerance, has a policy of accommodation. It was not Dr. Ambedkar. It was Nehru who was citing by submitting the flag bill by Dr. Ambedkar. You see? So there was a deeper struggle that has gone in the process of formation of independent India, and in that context, when he's reinventing Buddhism, that is something a greater challenge he had to face, because, well, he converted to Buddhism in the midst of Marxist, communist movements were at the uprise. The Leninist, Marxist, even Maoist ideas were at its peak. Bloodbath would have been happening in India. But by controlling that, non-violence is a force here, right? I often say that you can show the history of wars. I cannot show history of non-violence. How can I show the history of peace, right? So, in interpreting that, it's very important to understand the religions in plural and religion in singular, right? What he meant by religion as an emancipatory force, where all, even in Western theologian tradition, like Thurman or even Roy in Miss Rajaram Mohan Roy in India, or sort of Isaac Weiss when he was reforming the Jewish Reformation movement in early 18th century, probably when he hit to Europe, to the America, he was a man. So you can be Jewish at the same time you can be a modern, right? But nonetheless, fundamental structure as far as Indian context is concerned remain the same with the, what I said, the cosmogenic corruption, the origin that has been determined your birth and gender and caste. That never changed. That's where Dr. Ambedkar takes the two fundamental words from his guru, Mahatma Phule. And Mahatma Phule says there is a difference between reformation and transformation. So Dr. Ambedkar was not a reformist. Dr. Ambedkar was a transformist. He transformed the consciousness. there is a cognitive shift that has happened in the process of his revival of Buddhism. Your epistemic revolution has happened because you reinterpret your own existence. Who am I? As a human being. That's why he says, I am a free human being now. It's not only renunciation of Hinduism. Because in that, even, okay, if you even made a Shankaracharya, the question he asked, or whatever power you have been given, it's not mere my materialistic emancipation. My battle is spiritual, he says. Right? How do I define my existence as a being? And that is located in the Varnashrama Dharma. Whoever you become, even diasporic studies, you see, we migrated or we lived here or living here, but that doesn't really change the notion of existence, the way I carry my being in the larger world. And that needs to be free mobilization, right? And that needs to be on the basis of equality. It's not mere political equality. Me as an equal human being has a potential to attain an enlightenment. And I think that's where he replaces, he said that niti and dharma. If I have to replace God in any religion, I will replace by that niti. And niti here is a ethics, not just morality, because morality is a highly contextual word. While, I don't know, in Christian traditions, sort of you're born with the original sin, right? And that comes from your own creation. All the time you carry and you rely on the God. Of course, there are very positive aspects. I'm not how can I say, it's a theological question that needs to be looked very delicately, closely. But what Buddha departed, or what Ambedkar interpreted, you are not born with the original sin. You are born with the original good. You are born with the original good. Pabassanam idam chittam. This mind is luminous. And that's where I think the cognitive shift, or your sort of shift in every change of your own existence that has happened when he was interpreting the Buddhism and reviving Buddhism. It's not a child's game, he said. I'm sieving this boat like any navik. Navika like I'm boatman. Sailor. Where I do not want to face any wave can swallow me. I wanted to emancipate my people. I'm carrying that responsibility. Otherwise, what could have discourse I have been encountering in these conferences or in the world discourses of religions in plurality? You see? That's what I would respond, unless Professor Quinn has something to add.
I'd like to ask Nikita if she feels the women's movement in India is actually has some gains and has success in the context of her research, which is so powerful. I mean, are we making progress or are we just kind of stuck?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Cool. I think it's two ways. Yes, we definitely are making progress considering the research papers that I have read to now. Yes, we are definitely making progress, especially considering the northern part of India and southern part of India. In southern part, it has become a little less. In north, it still exists, but I cannot completely say that there is no psychological or social impact on children, especially. Getting married, yes, there are so many student bodies and so many some support groups these days that people are definitely getting married, but after the after effects, what if children are born? So the impact on children is still there. Which caste is the child assigned to? Because this is an intercaste marriage, what exactly is the caste that we need to put to the child? So the conflict from the male side and female side. So this is one common thing that I have seen in all the couples. And their major concern was with respect to children itself. So I cannot completely, it is a positive thing and I feel very bad about it. But yeah, the problem still persists.
If I could just ask a follow-up,
Please.
because I just read the very, very powerful memoir of Maisab Ambedkar.
Yeah.
That is Savita Kabir, who I met and had the privilege of spending some time with before she passed. And I was so deeply impressed with her commitment, not only to her husband, but to Buddhism and to the struggle for rights. She's a remarkable person, and everybody should read her memoir, whether they read it in Marathi or in English. But when I went to India several times and I met with Ambedkar followers, they say, well, she killed him. You know, she poisoned him. He could have lived much longer except for her. But it's quite the reverse, because his illness was so severe. She saved his life. She gave him 10 more years of life, or 8 more years of life. So I'm wondering, in your work, does the story of Maisa Ambedkar ever come up? Do people talk about this, or is this kind of a taboo subject?
No, apparently no one actually spoke about this. But yes, there was a mention of Ambedkar committing to an intercaste marriage, but not the point that you said with respect to, Maisa poisoning Ambedkar. That was not at all in the picture. There was just a mention of him committing an intercaste marriage, and rather everyone saw that as a support. Ki, yeah, the person himself did an intercaste marriage, so not everyone was aware of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, but whoever was, they had a positive note on Ambedkar, and there was no specific mention of, the conspiracy that you just mentioned. And I am sorry, I did not do much work on that particular aspect.
Okay.
Venkat.
Yeah, just a simple question I have for Nikita. Do you have any statistics on how many marriages are, intercaste marriages? I mean, that are happening in Indian, you have all these registration of marriages, but it's difficult to capture that type of data, I think, right?
Yeah.
There's
So
nothing.
I think there was, so when I was doing my research, the last data was done in 2019. I don't remember the name, I think it was Professor Thar. He said that, based on his research, there are only 5% of intercaste marriages happening in entire India. 5% or less.
See, the other thing is, we hear a lot of bad things, right? Every time something goes wrong. But there are so many successful marriages. It's, something as a scholars, researchers, we have to learn how to tell that side of the story. Okay, that is what actually takes forward, okay? Just talking about, bad things, I don't know how we make progress, but I'll tell you, my family, in second generation of my family, my generation, my brother married cast out of 4, my wife married out of different caste, and my second generation, 4 girls married, all 4 are intercaste marriages, and like without any issues, like no fighting, no parents accepted, they're all nice. So things are happening, but it's still very low. I think as a the challenge for some of your researchers, scholars, how do you bring that positive side of the story and document, illustrate, so it's hard, but that would be something very helpful. Yeah.
Nitika, I have a quick question. Do you also see a difference between rural and urban India in terms of like intercaste marriages? And
Yes, yeah. Please.
what were your
Sorry.
observations regarding this? Like, what were the key observations? Do you see the rural and the urban difference?
So, the previous person, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Yes, there were definitely some positive aspects as well. I wanted to conclude mentioning that, but because I ate a lot of time, I couldn't. All the intercaste marriages, there are some divorced and separated couples, but rest of them, despite facing so many issues from families, they are still together. Right? They moved out of the homes and they are still together. Yes, that is one thing. I think it is the connection and love that is keeping them together. And consider the second question about rural and urban. Yes. So with respect to the urban setup, the second and third generation learners. So these people are doing intercaste marriages irrespective of parents' approval. But when that is one key point, but when it comes to rural setup, especially the first generation learners, they are quite hesitant to go ahead with an intercaste marriage because their social setup and their conditioning is only with respect to the rural area. So even after getting married, they will again have to go back to the rural setup. That is because they are just first generation learners only. The second thing is with respect to the rural setup, when there is no patriarch, either from the female side or the male side, the intercaste marriage is becoming quite easy. If there is the patriarch of the family is, has passed away or something, especially from the female side, they are ready to go ahead with an intercaste marriage, just like, give away the girl. So that is something I've seen. But in urban setup, although the intercaste marriages are increasing, they are still keeping themselves together. But in urban setup, it is taking about second to third generation to go ahead with it. While in the rural setup, although it is happening quite early, there are a lot of challenges that are there in rural setup.
Yeah. Reena, can you go back to the from last second slide? From last second slide, children before the children, yeah. Just a question. And then among these intercaste marriages, um, do you see the Dalits and the tribals, women and the men, who is facing a lot of challenges?
That's a
Men
no,
and
see,
women.
the thing is, it is layered. All right, so I cannot say caste comes first or gender comes first. But my research was focused towards women's challenges.
Yeah.
So I think I was biased. Okay, because my mom faced challenges, I think I was biased towards that. I would again mention one point, which is no, I can't say that either. I think it's women. For me, if I had to say, I think it is women facing most of the challenges because these carry forward to the children. Because they take care of the homes and the kind of pressure that they get from relatives, the kind of expectations, societal expectations that they have. Should they satisfy them or should they actually take care of the children who do not have any grandparents yet? In some cases, not all of them. So I think that again passes down to children, right? The questions arise from children ki, okay, why are my grandparents not talking and what is my mom hiding? A mother never says ki, this is what we have done, so we do not have grandparents or anything. She tries to bring everyone together and give the best to the children. So I would say it is the woman who's facing most. Like,
Millions.
And
biased.
privilege of preference. Mahesh, you're talking about.
I just want to add, I know 3 cases where the dominant, like casting the girl married, oppressed caste, and everything, the before marriage, of course, they were, in love and all that. Then suddenly you start imposing all your, practices, from food to this and with the kids, and they were harassed by these women. So 3 victims I know firsthand, but it's not always normal generalization. But I know 3 candidates, their caste played a major role, and poor guys were victimized.
Millions.
Okay, Nikita, I have to admit that I came late, so I might not have got the whole import of what you presented, but I have a question based on my experience. I come from Mumbai. I'm in the US for 30 years, so my data might be outdated, but I'll share it with you. I come from a very urbanite background with education in a convent school, so most of my compatriots, my Dalit acquaintances, boys, they married outside the caste. And that is a very common phenomenon in my generation, because these were like erudite, you might even say elite part of the society. I did not see the girls in my community at my generation get the same proportion of getting married in other castes. So that left imbalance for eligible males in that category for the girls, and that created an imbalance. It was a well-known part of the imbalance. That was one part of it. Other part of it was the boys who married outside the caste usually married in caste above them, obviously, and somewhere they were compromised to the movement because their ideology also got compromised in the process. So is there any data in your research around this gap and this compromise of qualified Ambedkarites getting diluted down the line?
The second point of qualified Ambedkars getting diluted down the line, I think something that I have noticed, especially in the couples that were aware of Ambedkars and who were Ambedkarites, I think they intrinsically they value Baba Saheb so much that if seen, there was one case that I have mentioned ki after 6 years of trying to convince the parents, the girl had to commit suicide. So after he committed suicide, the guy waited for 2 to 3 years and again he did a first marriage. So that is one case. So people who were Ambedkarites, I think they were very much adamant to go for an intercaste marriage. In the first point, there is no enough data to support your point. So I did not take much of data. I just researched about 15 couples and then read a lot of research papers. So I cannot really support your first point or
Thank
add
you.
anything to it. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Please.
I just don't feel we should end without saying something about Atika's paper.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
just-
exactly. I was about to
Yeah,
come on
I want
her.
to say-
Yeah.
I want to say that
I know.
because there's
Yeah.
a big debate happening, which I'm sure you're aware of, about Columbus Day
Yeah.
in the United States. So I saw an image recently this past week of a Christopher Columbus statue with red paint thrown on it because he's killing the indigenous people. And so this groups want to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples' Day. And they're attacking the idea of Columbus because, in fact, he really committed genocide, along with Jeffrey Amherst, for example, and other colonial conquerors in North America. So that's a big issue, but it's interesting in context of your paper because it involves iconoclasm of statues.
Yes.
So I wondered if you'd given.
And also, I think I'll just add so that you can give your brief account because I was aware of that. That question still goes what Queen asked about, are we really, even Nikita's, but I want your response. Are we stuck in terms of liberating ourselves, in terms of presenting our iconographies of assertion and the politics that goes around aesthetics? Still we see the grim pictures of dismantled images and the insults that directly hurts the sentiments of the followers of Dr. Ambedkar. So do you see that as a progressing phenomena, or do you see that's still a grim picture? And if you can just comment on, if you want, what you mean by Ambedkarian aesthetics. That would be great.
Thank you for the questions.
Can you go there?
You want to come here?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I feel like this persistence on like making anything that uncomforts us as a happy tale is just unnecessary. Because the point of the research is to like say what the realities are there, and I am not there in the field because I'm not somebody who's making the sculptures. So I didn't want to like sugarcoat it in any way because in one of my recent field works back in India, I went to Bareilly and I met this person called Dwarika Prasad, which all of us should take the note of his name. He was somebody who worked with Kanshi Ram. And when he tried to establish the first statue of Baba Saheb near Bareilly, both of his hands were broken. So he's lived for 50 years without any fingers on his hand. I don't know how to make it happy for you. And I refuse to do that. Because for me, any form of cultural philosophy is not a matter of a black and white, grim, or a happy picture. It's layered, it's complex, it's intersectional, and that is where I want my work to reside. And I feel very strongly about these components of research, especially as inhabiting a dual category of Dalit women. And clearly the direction, the discourse of the panel was going on, the balance was clearly off. That said, one question was about the grim, then you asked about Ambedkarian aesthetics, and if we do justification, if we suffix any form of categorization with anything like Dalit, so Dalit aesthetics, what do I mean by that? So Professor Alone, along with Professor Santosh Sadanand, are just like few people who could enter the realm of art history and say our experience matters, and therefore there is a need for them to bring their own theoretical framework. Because otherwise we are always getting challenged as third world scholars, like where is your own methodological empirical tool? Herein, Alone makes an intervention by saying Ambedkarian aesthetics is a formula that critiques cultural philosophy, and I agree by that. So I don't necessarily see a dismantling of his work that needs to be done in order for me to build upon it. I want to cite that because that is where I take it from. Second is about Dalit aesthetics. Yes, there is a debate on that, which is a very legitimate debate, because when we posit what is modernism in art history, we are often asking ourselves, should we call it in a more ethical way subaltern art history, if not Dalit art history, because it makes a lot of us uncomfortable, so then should we call it Ambedkarian art history? I think these debates live on and we all bring our own subjectivity to it. For me, it's very important to not impose my own subjectivity in the fields that I go to, and people want to say that this is my work, this is Dalit art, and that is from where, and it is not just like Professor Alone, but it is the true material, laborious work of so many people like Dwarika Prasad, which makes me call it just Ambedkarian and Dalit art and not any other fancy theoretical term. That said, also seeing aesthetics through the lens of philosophy is not a prerequisite for us to understand my research, because we also tend to then dismantle and negate the work of so many other scholars of our community that have like painstakingly built this field. And art history by default has been very, very negative of us and our experiences. It's so scripture laden. One example that I couldn't bring in this paper is also that in the Hindu scriptures, the punishment for a Dalit building architectural setup is the cutting of his hands and pouring molten lead into his ear. So what do you make of art history then? And why not suffix or prefix and also then intervene into it? Also, I come from a community that used to make shoes and sculptures. So I will bring in my subjectivity into it, whether it's through philosophy, theology, or any other lens. And about the Columbus Day, it's very interesting because I know that Oxford and also in South Africa, there have been movements against colonial iconographies where Black and other students have wanted to bring down the sculpture of Rhodes and also other colonial figures. And I see that as a resonance with our struggle, because here is somebody who's trying to like erect sculptures and statues, whether it's through absence or presence, is just a march towards establishing your own pride and cultural markers and reclaiming land. And there is another movement that says that public art shouldn't trigger us, it shouldn't humiliate us. So it is a very direct resonance of self-respect and dignity. That is why I also wanted to call it like the denial of dignity to Dalits, and not like just any other form of desecration or defacement, because the core of it is rooted in dignity that has transatlantic and other intersectional resonances.
Yeah, the pushback is from the Italian communities, Italian American communities are saying when you desecrate Columbus's statue, you are being anti-Italian, and that goes back 100 years when the Italians began to immigrate to the U.S. and were discriminated against at that time. So it's interesting. It's a struggle.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I just thank you very much for all the panelists, Nikita, Atika and Mahesh, for their wonderful presentations. And thank you for your beautiful questions and conversations. I close this panel, and I think I'll hand it over to the organizers. Thank you very much.